It's interesting. I don't think, like, if somebody asks you what religion you are, or if you describe yourself and you say, well, I'm a witch, it's like that term doesn't really describe anything, really, about the individual. The individual themselves shows who they are. So,
well,
I mean, so
and
what
if people ask, like, if I'm in an interfaith thing, it's like how many words do you have available? If somebody asks, first off, if somebody depending on how many words you know you have to use. If somebody asks, first off, I would say I'm a Wiccan priest.
Mm-hmm.
If I could step beyond the next couple of words, I'd say what's been called a witch. And if I have a few more words beyond that, I'd say similar to Native American or Hindu or Shinto religious practice, but with a predominantly European and Mediterranean cultural context. Now, that's got to change. That's what I used to always say, and now it's got to change because we've changed. Mm-hmm. And it's been driven home to me recently with the Black Lives Matter discussion, because the craft has gone through phases, and as it started out, it was a British thing, and that expanded predominantly in English-speaking countries, and all of us who were doing it thought of it as a British thing,
right,
that's come over here,
right,
and it's expanding into other places. And so I could say that, oh yeah, it came out of the cultural fusion of Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, and Roman elements in Britain. Yeah. And expanded now to include more wider European and Mediterranean things. Well, now we're in a whole different place.
Right.
And the internet's put us in a whole different place. And so a whole bunch of people are coming to craft, Wicca's now become synonymous. Used to be that was a British word. That's out the window. Coming to Wicca as a world religion. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole different expectation of Wicca as a world religion, and looking at it as, okay, this is a world religion I'm getting involved in, and by the way, there's some British sort of initiatory people off over there. Mm. They're the minority strange group off over there. And when you think of Wicca that way, my description doesn't work anymore. If I say with a predominantly European and Mediterranean cultural context, I'm Xing out all the people who are coming to this world religion from a Latin American space, or from an African space, or from an Asian space. I'm not sure how to adapt that yet. Mm-hmm. Because I want to be true in what I say. And the craft that I joined was one thing. The craft that it's now become in just a few years of my life is something else. So I'm supposed to give a workshop at Covenant of the Goddesses annual meeting in a few months called That First Difficult Conversation, which is exactly about this. Mm-hmm. And I'm still working on it. I'm still working on what is the easy, quick way to say what we are and be true to what we've become. And that's tough. So. Well,
I think I agree with you. I think it is difficult. I think that it is expanding, and it's like you had mentioned earlier about how paganism or Wicca has gone through in 50 years what Christianity went through in 250 years. I think with the shrinking world that we have and realizing but other religion, it is difficult, and I think it's going to expand quickly. And I recently myself, I've been struggling with what is a pagan? How do you define what a pagan is? And
especially when the definitions the description that I would have used, there would be a whole bunch of people included in that, like say heathens, that I would say would be included in that would then say, no, I don't want to be in your group, pagans. And we're like, okay.
Right.
Because one of the hallmarks of interfaith work is self-definition. Mm-hmm. You don't tell someone what they are. They say what they are.
Right.
I went through this weird space once when we were putting together an interfaith event, and I said we had, we were covered. We had Catholics and Protestants, and Jack London. No, Jack London, who was a Protestant, who was a Lutheran minister, and I was putting in the Protestant category. Said, wait a minute, we're not Protestants. They're going, you're a Lutheran. You define what Protestantism is. Like, oh no, we haven't considered ourselves Lutherans for ages, or I haven't considered ourselves Protestants for ages. Like, what? Like, my brain's just sort of tweaking. And he explains about how they felt that right after the Protestant Reformation that the movement had been hijacked by more conservative elements, and like Knox and Calvin and such, and so the Lutherans really didn't identify with Protestantism after that and considered themselves to be something else, to be Lutherans. And they're like, okay, I have to accept. That's how you define yourself. That's how you say, okay, you're not a Protestant. And I come home and I tell my wife, boy, the Lutheran minister was explaining to me how he's not a Protestant. She's going, what do you mean? They define Protestantism. I go through it again. And I've had this conversation many times with people. But it's not up to us.
Mm-hmm.
The groups define themselves. And so even though in my brain I may have categories and say, well, Wiccan is this and pagan is that and stuff, there'll be people in those that I would feel would be in those categories who will say, no, I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to respect it. I have to respect it. And at the same time sort of wrestle with the dichotomy in my brain of, have a categorization system that seems to work, then with people saying they're not part of it, and I haven't really come up with a new system, that explains it or that works. And so I just have to kind of figure it out. And so
the old software doesn't work with the new operating system.
Yeah, kind of. And just kind of sitting with it, and letting it be. But I was giving a class at the Chaplaincy Institute recently on Earth religions, and this had been after the fairly recent. I'll generalize it as rise of the polytheists. That's probably a way too general way to put it, but certainly the suddenly increased awareness in the community of people who are self-defining as polytheists, especially after a recent Pantheacon. And so I was teaching this class, and I was sort of saying, well, a lot of other religions do this, and pagans do this, except for the polytheists. And I was constantly having to go, gee, this thing that I would say normally doesn't apply to them, or they think differently, or they wouldn't want to be included. And so I have to go say, well, this, except for the polytheists, and sort of always trying to accommodate that in fact there is this other view out there, but that it's breaking a lot of the hardware. Trying to so something I'm still trying to figure out, and it'll take time, but we'll try to figure it out. But the main thing is that all along you have to let people self-define.
Yeah.
And that can always kind of tweak your head.
Definitely, especially when you're trying to be all generalize or being all-inclusive.
Yeah, and those are the things that are at odds.
Yeah.
Generalizing and being all-inclusive. Those are the things that are at odds, yeah, exactly. And especially it's been difficult because I know there were a number of polytheists who were writing online that they objected to my speaking for them in meetings and saying, well, you should just speak for Wicca, and that's it, nothing else, and don't speak for us. And I'm going, I understand what you're saying and why, but the fact is that I'm very, very often, because I'm on the boards of a number of groups that don't have any other pagans, if I can use the word. I mean, meaning it's mainstream religions you've heard about, maybe a Native American who's trying to participate, but the systems are making it very difficult for that to happen. And me, very often it will be something like that. And so people say, well, like for example, we have an option here as we're rebuilding the chapel to make the pews movable. Do we need to do that? And she was like, no, we don't need that. And I'll go, excuse me, if you don't make them movable, there will be a lot of people who can't use it. Mm-hmm. There's be a lot of people who need to orient in a different direction, or need to meet in a circle, or something else. And if you don't do it by making the pews movable, then you need to make another space. And if I don't say something, it's not going to happen.
Right.
And so, quite often, I'm speaking up for other religions or other practitioners because I know their concerns are not being met or addressed. And I feel like I have to do that rather than be silent. And I really feel like anybody does that. Anybody in any religion, if they know someone is going to be offended or left out or not addressed, they'll speak up. It's not just me. Everybody will do that. It just so happens that because we are such a different kind of religion, it's very often me.
Right.
And so being in that position where very often I am forced to speak for others, I think, then it makes it all the more important for me to be very careful about what I'm saying.
Right.
And try to make sure that I'm honoring and respecting everybody's desire for how they want to be represented. And the internet only makes it more complicated because like, it can change so much faster.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because we were in the throes of the satanic hysteria. And I don't know how many people now remember it. Recently, there was the case of Damien Eccles and what was called the West Memphis Three in the South, where 3 young men who